The Greek economy got some much-needed relief on November 27th, when international lenders agreed on measures to reduce the country's debt repayments and unlock billions of euros in bailout funding. My name's Jake Statham, and I'm joined today by Martin Koehring, who's an analyst in our West European team, and he's going to talk about the implications of the deal. Martin, the deal, if fully implemented, will unlock 34 billion euros of bailout money for Greece next month. That sounds like a lot, but realistically, how long will this sum tide the Greek government over before it runs out of money again?
Well, I would say actually not for too long, because Greece receives these loans in tranches, and it was supposed to get a tranche of about 32 billion in June already. So this money that has now been committed to Greece is nothing more than basically giving a loan that was already committed in June. And it was suspended because of two elections, one in May and one in June, and because Greece was not able to implement the fiscal cuts it was supposed to implement. So it's basically suspended loans. And it will get another 10 billion in the first quarter of next year, if everything that has currently been agreed will actually be implemented. And it also will receive another 46 billion or so next year as part of the 240 billion euro bailout agreement. So it still needs to receive lots of money next year before it actually can return to markets, which will probably not happen in the next couple of years anyway. And it also needs, on top of all that, it needs another 30 billion because the fiscal targets for Greece were extended by 2 years. And this money has not been agreed by Eurozone leaders at all. So there's lots of money that Greece is supposed to receive and has not received yet. So there's lots of risk that Greece will not actually be able to roll over its debt until and unless Eurozone leaders agree on more debt relief.
How significant are other key elements of the deal, such as cuts in the interest rates that Greece must pay on its debt and extensions of the repayment period? Will these make a significant difference to Greece's fiscal position?
It will make some difference. First of all, the bilateral loans to Greece amount to about 53 billion euros. So actually cutting the interest rate on those loans significantly means that Greece will save about 4 billion. And also actually extending the maturities is also important, because it means that Greece will not have to repay around 45 billion euros in the next couple of years. But that's actually not something that Greece will actually save, so it will not reduce Greece's debt burden. But what it will do, it will make it easier for Greece to finance its debt in the next couple of years. So it doesn't reduce the debt burden, but it makes it easier for Greece to finance the debt. But the big question is also about another element in the deal, and that's the bond buyback scheme. So Greece is supposed to use some of the money that it received, around 10 billion euros, to buy back some of its bonds in the secondary markets at a discount. And this deal is very difficult to actually implement, because lots of private sector bondholders are probably not willing to sell back the bonds that they bought cheaply, to sell them back to Greece. So that's another element that it's a really risky strategy to do this and might not actually work out.
Over the course of the euro crisis, we've seen lots of supposed breakthrough agreements that have failed to materialize as hoped. What is the risk that the latest agreement will fall through?
Well, first of all, there's a very short-term risk that it will actually fall through, and that's because Eurozone parliaments still have to ratify the deal. So it's this agreement that happened a couple of days ago is basically agreement by governments. So Eurozone parliaments still have to ratify. For example, the German parliament will have to debate the deal in the next couple of days, and there are already voices within the German parliament that they are not getting enough time to scrutinize the deal. And also Germany, for the first time, for example, will actually make a loss on their loans to Greece, which doesn't go down well with the increasingly Eurosceptic German parliament and German public. So for example, the fact that the European Central Bank will transfer back some of the profits that they made on Greek government bonds, and they will transfer them back to Greece, means that the Bundesbank, the German central bank, will lose out on some of the profits they made on Greek bonds, and also the fact that the interest rates are reduced on Greek government on the loans to Greece means that also Germany and other creditor countries such as Finland, Netherlands will also lose some money on their loans to Greece, and that's controversial. So it might actually, there's a risk that some parliaments might actually not agree to ratify the deal. But in the end, we think it's more likely that they will ratify the deal. So that's the very short term. But in the medium term, there's the risk that this deal is simply not enough, because what Eurozone leaders have done is basically they have exhausted almost all the potential measures that they can still implement to reduce Greece's debt without actually an outright write-down on their loans. And it looks like this will be the only solution that will be sustainable to bring Greek debt to a sustainable level. But so far they have not been willing to accept an outright write-down, especially before the German election, because next year in September there's an election in Germany, and Germany is not willing to accept an outright loss on Greek loans before the electorate votes.
Is it likely that Greece will be able to stick to the conditions imposed on it in this new agreement?
Well, the new conditions imposed in this agreement are actually not that harsh. I mean, if you look at the 3 conditions that they have to implement, for example, they have to improve fiscal monitoring, then they have to, meet their privatization targets, but the privatization targets have actually come down significantly already. And then they have to set up a segregated account to which they will pay the privatization proceeds and also the primary surplus, which is the government surplus minus debt interest payments. So these conditions are actually not that harsh if you compare this to what Greece already has to implement to get bailout loans. And these fiscal cuts, for example, for the next 2 years, are around 13.5 billion euros. That's pension cuts, public wage cuts, and also they have to reduce the public sector workforce by another 27,000. And these things all add up to causing lots of social costs for the Greek people. For example, unemployment is now about 25%, youth unemployment around 55%, and the economy keeps contracting and not recovering. And all this has actually meant that Greek people are losing trust in the euro. For example, in May this year, 81% of the population was still in favor of Greece remaining in the Eurozone, but this has actually dropped to around 63% by November this year. And in addition to that, the government is a very unstable 3-party coalition and might actually collapse next year or 2014. And all these things, the risk of political instability and social unrest, means that it's very difficult for Greece to actually implement these measures, and if they don't, then there's a risk that they will default and leave the euro.
What does the deal mean for the rest of the Eurozone, for example in terms of the risk of a breakup of the currency union?
Right, first of all I would say that countries such as Italy and Spain might be potentially quite upset by what is happening, because they actually have to borrow money at much higher interest rates than Greece is now getting. So they're actually losing money on lending to Greece. And also there might be potential double standard, because countries such as Ireland and Portugal that are also on bailout agreements still have to pay much higher interest rates. So they might actually demand a similar deal that Greece is getting. But on the more broader level, I would say that the deal that has been struck between the Eurogroup and the IMF is actually positive for Greece, because it shows that Eurozone leaders and the IMF are committed to keeping Greece in the Eurozone. So that confirms to some extent why we think that the risk of Greece leaving the Eurozone in the next 5 years is 40%. So our baseline is still that Greece remains within the Eurozone. But we think that if Greece were to leave the Eurozone, the reasons for that would more likely come from within Greek society because of the social costs that the fiscal austerity has, rather than actually the Eurozone pushing Greece out.
Thank you, Martin. You can find more of our analysis of the euro crisis on www.eiu.com. Thank you and goodbye.